Welcome to Once Upon English.
What if I told you the greatest revolution in modern science began with a girl who had nothing, no money, no safety, no permission, even to study? She crossed borders in the freezing night, hid in secret classrooms, and fought a world that insisted she would never matter. Yet, that same girl would uncover invisible forces, reshape physics and chemistry, and become the first person in history to win 2 Nobel Prizes. This isn't just a biography. This is the moment a quiet girl turned into a force that changed the world forever. Stay with us, because Marie Curie's story will ignite something inside you.
A whisper that changed the world. The room was quiet, not the kind of quiet you notice, the kind that settles into your bones, the kind that wraps around your breath like fog on a cold morning. A woman sits at a worn desk. Her fingers tremble slightly as she lifts a glass tube. Inside, a glow, faint, green, ghost-like. It flickers softly, casting shadows on the walls of her Parisian lab. She doesn't blink. She doesn't smile. She only watches. Her eyes, tired yet bright, see more than most people can even imagine. Not just a glowing element, but a revolution. The glow is radium. The woman is Marie Curie, and she is about to change science and the world forever. But this story doesn't begin with glory or Nobel Prizes or standing ovations. It begins in silence, in cold, in hunger, in a land that tried to crush her spirit before she could ever rise. It begins in Warsaw, under foreign flags, with books hidden in cellars and a little girl dreaming of numbers in the dark. This is not just the story of a scientist. This is the story of a warrior of the mind, a woman who loved too deeply, lost too painfully, and fought too fiercely to ever be forgotten. This is the story of Marie Curie. Warsaw, 1867. In a narrow apartment in Russian-occupied Warsaw, on a cold November night in 1867, a girl was born. She didn't cry loudly, just a soft breath, as if she already knew that silence would be her most constant companion. Her name was Maria Salomea Skłodowska. The world around her wasn't free. It wasn't fair. And it wasn't kind to people like her, Poles, under Tsarist rule, forbidden from speaking their own language, studying their own history, or even dreaming too loudly. Her father, Władysław, was a teacher, strict, proud, passionate about physics and math. He taught even when forbidden, even when it cost him his job, even when he had to sell laboratory equipment just to buy bread. Her mother, Bronisława, was a school principal, elegant, intelligent, distant, but death was near. First, little Maria's oldest sister died of typhus. Then, her mother died of tuberculosis when Maria was only 10 years old. Maria didn't scream. She didn't break. She folded her grief into notebooks. She buried her pain in pages filled with equations and sketches of stars. At just 12, she was reading Newton under the bed sheets. At 14, She could solve complex algebra faster than her teachers, but the doors of higher education were closed to women in Poland. So what did she do? She joined the Flying University, an underground secret school for women. Held in apartments, behind curtains, with guards posted to warn of police. There, she studied chemistry, mathematics, philosophy, subjects forbidden to her, subjects she would someday master beyond anyone's expectations. And through all of it, she dreamed. Not of fame, not of prizes, but of freedom. Freedom to learn, to think, to ask questions without fear. But dreams require sacrifice, so she made a deal. Her sister Bronya would go to Paris to study medicine, and Maria would stay behind, working as a governess in remote villages, sending money month by month until it was her turn. She lived with strangers, taught their children, read under candlelight after long days of work. She grew thin. Her clothes wore out, but her mind, sharp as ever. For 6 long years she waited. And then, in 1891, at the age of 24, with a few coins sewn into the lining of her coat and a suitcase filled with books and hope, Maria boarded a train. Destination: Paris, where the girl from occupied Warsaw would become Marie Curie. Paris, 1891. The train hissed into the station. Steam clouded the platform, and Maria Skłodowska, 24 years old, stepped into Paris. She didn't know anyone. She barely spoke French. She had no money, only a burning desire to study, to learn, to prove. She enrolled at the Sorbonne, one of Europe's top universities. She changed her name to Marie, easier for the French tongue, but she never let go of her Polish soul. By day, she studied physics and mathematics under candlelight. By night, she lived in tiny, frozen rooms, sometimes with no food, sometimes with no heat. Her fingers went numb in winter. She fainted in class from hunger. Once, she lived off nothing but bread and tea for weeks. But her mind blazed like a furnace. She devoured books on electromagnetism, thermodynamics, analytical geometry. Her professors were stunned. A woman, a foreigner, ranking first in her class? Unbelievable, unacceptable to some, but undeniable. Still, Marie didn't care for applause. She wasn't here to impress. She was here to become. Science became her refuge. Equations didn't lie. Atoms didn't judge. Experiments didn't care if she was poor or female or foreign. Every night, as the city outside glowed with gaslights, Marie sketched formulas like poetry. She was chasing truth, invisible, powerful, pure. And yet, something was missing. Not fame, not rest, but partnership. She needed someone who could match her intellect, someone who wouldn't be threatened by her brilliance, but would amplify it. And then, as if fate had been waiting, she met Pierre Curie, a physicist, quiet, awkward, obsessed with crystals and magnetism. He saw Marie not as a curiosity, but as an equal. They spoke about energy, particles, time. They walked along the Seine, debating scientific models, while the rest of the city danced and drank. He admired her intensity. She admired his depth. He once wrote, "It would be a beautiful thing if we could live our lives devoted to science together." Pierre proposed marriage. At first, Marie declined. She planned to return to Poland to teach, but Poland still denied women access to scientific careers. And the thought of leaving Pierre, the only man who saw her not as fragile, but formidable, was unbearable, so she stayed. And on July 26, 1895, they married. A simple ceremony, no rings, no flowers. She wore a dark blue dress, one she would wear for years in the lab. They had no riches, only a shared passion, science. The Curie apartment was modest, but their minds danced with possibility. They believed that somewhere, hidden inside matter, was a force never before seen. They would search for it together, even if it cost them everything. Discovering what the eye cannot see. The world was changing. At the edge of the 19th century, science was moving beyond what the eye could see. Electricity, X-rays, invisible forces. And Marie Curie? She was hungry to go further. In 1896, a French physicist named Henri Becquerel had discovered something strange. Uranium gave off mysterious rays that could pass through solid objects, even in darkness. No wires, no electricity, just energy, leaking from the heart of matter itself. Marie was fascinated. What was this radiation? Could other elements do the same? Was there something deeper inside the atom? She chose it as the topic of her doctoral research, a bold move. No woman in France had ever earned a PhD in physics. The Curies needed space. They were given a storage room behind the School of Physics. Not a lab, a shed. The roof leaked. The floor was dirt. There was no ventilation, no insulation, no safety. But it became their temple of discovery. They crushed tons of pitchblende, a black rock mined from Bohemia, boiled it in acid, stirred it for hours over open flames, filtered, cooled, measured, repeated. Days turned into nights, nights turned into years. The work was brutal. Marie's hands were raw. Pierre's back ached. Their clothes reeked of chemicals. But finally, hidden in the waste of uranium ore, they found something, a glow, soft green, alive, a new element. They called it polonium, in honor of Marie's homeland, still crushed under foreign rule. But that wasn't all. There was another glow, even stronger, even more dangerous, another element, even more radioactive. They called it radium. Marie didn't just discover radiation, she measured it, defined it, created the term radioactivity. Their findings challenged everything. Atoms weren't solid, unbreakable spheres. They leaked, they decayed, they transformed. The world had never seen a force like this. Energy from within matter itself. The scientific community was stunned. skeptical, but Marie's data was meticulous. In 1903, Marie and Pierre Curie, along with Becquerel, were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. Marie Curie became the first woman to win a Nobel Prize. But instead of celebration, she went back to the lab. The work wasn't finished. The questions were bigger than ever. What else could radiation do? Could it heal? Could it harm? They didn't know. They only knew they had opened a door. And there was no turning back. When discovery comes at a cost, the world now knew the name Marie Curie. The Nobel Prize had made her famous, but fame meant little to her. She and Pierre continued their work in the same shed. No luxury, no assistance, just dust, acid, glassware, and glowing stones. They kept vials of radium on their desks, in their pockets, even beside their beds, fascinated by the soft, eerie light it gave off in the dark. But they didn't know. No one knew. Radiation was not just powerful, it was deadly. Marie's fingers cracked and bled. Her bones ached. Pierre's hands trembled. He developed chronic fatigue. Their health began to fade, slowly, invisibly. Still, they pushed on. In the spring of 1906, Pierre was offered a chair at the University of Paris. It was a long overdue recognition. He was finally being accepted by the conservative academic elite. But fate was waiting. On a rainy day in April, Pierre was walking through the streets of Paris, lost in thought. He crossed a busy road. A heavy horse-drawn cart came from around the corner. He slipped on the wet cobblestones. The cart's wheel crushed his skull. He died instantly. He was 46 years old. Marie was shattered, not just by grief, but by the brutality of it, the randomness, the silence that followed. For days, she barely spoke. She wandered the streets alone. She wrote in her diary to Pierre as if he were still alive. They took you from me, and yet the world continues. I do not understand it. I do not want it. But science, the same force that had brought them together, now called her back. Everyone expected Marie to disappear, to retreat into widowhood, to grieve quietly as women were expected to do. She did not. Instead, she returned to the university and was offered Pierre's professorship. She accepted. Marie Curie became the first woman to teach at the Sorbonne. Her first lecture? Hundreds packed the hall, expecting a breakdown or silence. She walked to the front, set down her notes, and began. When we examine the properties of radioactive elements, no tears, no hesitation, just science, just Marie. She resumed her work on radium, but now she was alone. She refined techniques for isolating radioactive elements. Her lab became a world center for radiation studies. She trained new scientists, including her daughter, Irene. In 1911, she was awarded a second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry. No one had ever done that before. 2 Nobel Prizes. 2 different fields. One woman. The press hounded her. The Academy hesitated. Some scientists whispered she didn't deserve it, that she was just Pierre's assistant. But they could not deny the data, could not ignore her discoveries, could not dim the light she had ignited. War, X-rays, and a different kind of heroism, 1914. The world erupted. World War I shattered Europe. Men marched to the trenches. Cannon fire echoed across the skies. Blood soaked the soil of France. And where was Marie Curie? Not hiding, not retreating to her lab. She was at the front lines, not with weapons, but with science. She knew what was coming. Wounded soldiers, shrapnel buried in muscle, bones shattered. Doctors couldn't operate blindly. They needed to see inside the body. Fast. So Marie turned to X-rays. They had been discovered by Wilhelm Röntgen just 2 decades earlier. But few hospitals had the machines, and none existed on the battlefield. Marie said, "If men are to be saved, we must bring the science to them." She built the first mobile radiology unit, a van fitted with an X-ray machine, a generator, photographic plates. They called it the Little Curie. She drove it herself, through war zones, past bombed-out villages, to the edge of combat. She trained over 150 women to use the machines, taught them anatomy, electricity, photography, and field safety. Thousands of wounded soldiers were treated because of her. Because of X-rays, surgeons could remove bullets, avoid nerves, save limbs, and lives. It wasn't glamorous. The vans broke down. She slept in barns. She caught fevers. Sometimes she worked 16 hours without rest. She refused medals, refused payment. She even melted her Nobel Prize medals to fund the war effort. The French military didn't understand her. Male doctors mocked her, but wounded soldiers whispered her name like a prayer. Madame Curie, the scientist who brought light to the battlefield. While risking her life, she never stopped being a mother. Her daughter Irene, just a teenager, worked beside her. Together, they helped operate the mobile units. Together, they studied radiation, war, and humanity. Irene would later grow to become a Nobel Prize-winning physicist herself. But during the war, she was simply her mother's shadow, watching, learning, preparing. When the war ended, the world tried to move on. But Marie Curie had already changed it. She returned to science, founded the Radium Institute in Paris, a center for medical research. She traveled the world raising funds for further research in radiation therapy, hoping to use it not for war, but to heal. But the damage to her body was already done. She had spent decades exposed to radiation. Her bones were weakening, her vision dimming. She would not live long enough to see just how far her work would go. But she had set the world on a new path, one filled with danger, yes, but also with hope. Legacy beyond the grave. The war was over. The world, broken and bruised, was rebuilding. Marie Curie, tired, fragile, and quietly heroic, returned to Paris. But she did not rest. She raised funds for her Radium Institute, a place dedicated to research in radiation therapy, to fight cancer, to save lives, to heal, not to destroy. She traveled across the world, even to the United States, where American women, touched by her story, donated their jewelry to help her buy a gram of radium, worth more than gold. She met presidents, kings, scholars, but she remained the same, modest, focused, scientific. Her lab coat remained her formal dress. Her eyes stayed on the microscope, not the camera, but the very light she had discovered, the glow that had inspired awe, was now eating her from the inside. Her hands trembled. Her eyesight weakened. Her marrow thinned. She refused to believe it was the radiation. No one truly understood its long-term effects yet. But her notebooks, her lab notes, even now, over a century later, are still radioactive. She developed aplastic anemia, a rare blood condition. Her body could no longer produce healthy blood cells. Still, she worked. Still, she taught. Still, she dreamed. Until, in a sanatorium in the French Alps, surrounded not by machines or metals, but by silence and soft white sheets, Marie Curie passed away. She was 66 years old. No grand ceremony, no final speech, just the quiet ending of a brilliant, burning life. But even in death, she made history. Marie Curie became the first woman to be buried in the Pantheon in Paris on her own merit, not as a wife, not as a widow, but as a pioneer. She discovered two elements, coined the term radioactivity, won 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different fields, saved lives during war, raised 2 daughters, one of whom won her own Nobel Prize. And beyond the science, she inspired millions. She showed that genius has no gender, that silence can be powerful, that one woman, armed with knowledge and a broken beaker, can change the world. Today, her name is on hospitals, schools, foundations, research centers. Her discoveries are used in cancer treatment, nuclear medicine, astronomy, and more. But her truest legacy? A girl somewhere, reading under the covers at night, dreaming of atoms and stars, believing that she too can matter. Because Marie Curie once did. A daughter of science, a heir of fire. After Marie's death in 1934, the world stood still for a moment of silence, for a woman who had split the atom and broken the mold. But her story didn't end there, because in the shadow of her lab coat stood a girl who had grown up among glass beakers, radiation, and revolution, a girl named Marie Curie. She was no ordinary child. She watched her mother in the lab, handled samples, read scientific papers as bedtime stories. At 18, Irene wasn't attending tea parties. She was driving mobile X-ray vans to the front lines of World War I. She was Marie's apprentice, her daughter, her legacy, and now she was ready to step into her own light. Irene joined the Radium Institute, now a global hub of radiation research. There, she met Frédéric Joliot, a bright young physicist with sharp eyes and restless ideas. Their chemistry wasn't just in science. They fell in love, and in 1926 became the Joliot-Curies. Together, they began experiments that would reshape the very fabric of matter. While Marie had discovered natural radioactivity, Irene and Frederic were about to do something even more daring. They would create it. In 1934, just months after Marie died, the Joliot-Curies bombarded aluminum with alpha particles. And then, something impossible happened. The aluminum became radioactive, not naturally, but by human hands. They had discovered artificial radioactivity. For the first time in history, humans had altered the structure of an atom and created a new element. This wasn't just a discovery. It was the dawn of the atomic age. In 1935, Irene and Frederic were awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, exactly 30 years after Marie and Pierre received theirs. For the first time ever, a mother and daughter, 2 generations, had both won Nobel Prizes in science. But the world was not kind. Like her mother, Irene faced doubt, sexism, and scientific jealousy. Some whispered that her Nobel was handed to her, that she was just continuing her mother's work. But data doesn't lie, and history never forgets. Irene Joliot-Curie had become a titan of physics, not just as Marie's daughter, but as a force of her own. Irene and Frederic's discovery led to innovations in nuclear medicine, radiation therapy, radioactive tracers, and, eventually, nuclear energy. The world was changing fast. Atoms were no longer silent. They could be split or used to heal. And the Curie name was etched into every molecule of that future. But light cast shadows. And the next part of the story leads us to a world racing toward unimaginable power. When light casts a shadow, the world was changing faster than anyone could imagine. Marie Curie's discoveries had opened a door into the mysterious and powerful world of atoms. But every door leads to a hallway and sometimes to a dark room. After the establishment of the Radium Institute, science rushed forward. Radiation wasn't just a curiosity anymore. It became a powerful tool in medicine and industry. Hospitals around the world started using radiation therapy to fight cancer, a once deadly disease now confronted with a strange glowing weapon. Irene Joliot-Curie and her husband Frederic pushed the boundaries further, creating radioactive elements artificially, changing the rules of physics forever. But the glow had a deadly secret. People who worked closely with radioactive materials began to suffer mysterious illnesses. Marie Curie herself had felt the price of discovery, her hands scarred, her health failing. Many early pioneers, including Irene's husband Frederic, developed radiation sickness. And yet the world was fascinated, eager to unlock even greater power. By the late 1930s, tensions were high in Europe. Scientists raced to understand the atom, not just for healing, but for destruction. The discovery of nuclear fission, the splitting of the atom, was a turning point. Suddenly, the same force that could cure cancer could also destroy entire cities. This dark promise loomed over the legacy of the Curies. Some scientists, inspired by the Curies, worked tirelessly for peace and medicine. Others, driven by politics and fear, pushed the world toward war. The energy that Marie and her family had helped reveal was now both a source of hope and a terrifying threat. And as the world plunged into another devastating war, the story of the atom became the story of humanity's greatest challenge. A family at the edge of power. The year was 1935. Just 1 year after Marie Curie's death, her daughter Irene and son-in-law, Frédéric Joliot-Curie, were standing on the Nobel stage. But this wasn't just a family tradition. Their discovery, artificial radioactivity, meant humans could now create radioactive elements at will. It was the moment science took control over the building blocks of matter. Irene and Frederick worked side by side. They were not just scientists, but partners in every sense. Two brilliant minds united by a shared mission. In their Paris lab, they conducted daring experiments. By bombarding elements like boron and aluminum with alpha particles, they created new, unstable atoms that emitted radiation. The implications were vast. Medicine. They developed radioactive tracers for diagnosing diseases. Agriculture. They explored how radiation could improve crop growth. Physics. They laid the foundation for nuclear chain reactions. But the 1930s were not just about science. Fascism was rising in Europe. The world was hurtling toward another war. And Irene and Frederick were not silent. They were vocal anti-fascists and advocates for scientific responsibility. They believed atomic research should serve peace, not war. They refused to cooperate with governments seeking to weaponize their work. In fact, they deliberately delayed publishing some of their findings, fearing they could be used to create a bomb. As pressure mounted, so did the toll on their health and relationship. Frederick's health deteriorated rapidly. His exposure to radiation had left him weak, often bedridden. Irene was carrying the weight of her mother's legacy, the future of the Radium Institute, her own family, and the burden of a world spiraling toward war. Despite it all, she pressed on, teaching, researching, raising awareness about nuclear ethics, fighting not just for atoms, but for humanity. In 1956, Frederick passed away. Irene followed him just 2 years later, in 1958. Both, like Marie, had fallen to the silent poison of radiation. But their legacy wasn't one of tragedy. It was a vision. They showed the world what science could do when guided by ethics, love, and courage. They proved that the Curie name was not just a piece of history. It was a living flame, lighting the way for every scientist, teacher, and dreamer to come. How the Curies changed the world forever. Marie Curie had passed. Irene and Frederic were gone. But the energy they unleashed, in every sense, was still rippling across the planet, and it would never fade. In universities and laboratories around the world, students still whispered her name, Madame Curie, not just as a scientist, but as a symbol of what? Of women breaking into science, of pursuing knowledge at any cost, of balancing discovery with responsibility. Marie Curie had never patented radium. She believed knowledge belonged to all of humanity, that one decision shaped the future of open science. She gave science to the people, and the world never forgot. Thanks to the Curie's work, entire new fields of science and medicine emerged. Nuclear medicine, using radiation to diagnose and treat disease. Radioactive tracers, revolutionizing biology and chemistry. Atomic physics, paving the way for particle accelerators and quantum research. Cancer therapy, saving millions through radiation-based treatments. Even space exploration was touched. Radioisotope thermoelectric generators, RTGs, used in space probes are based on Curie-era science. Their fingerprints are on everything from hospitals to satellites. Marie Curie became the first woman buried under the Pantheon in Paris for her own achievements, a sacred resting place for France's greatest heroes. Schools, research institutes, hospitals, and science festivals bear her name. Her image has appeared on currency, postage stamps, murals, statues, even spacecraft. The element curium-CM was named in her honor, a rare gesture in the scientific world. For women in STEM, Marie Curie became more than a role model. She was proof that brilliance had no gender, that persistence could shatter walls, that even in the darkest places, light could be found and measured and used to heal. Her story lit a fire in future scientists like Rosalind Franklin, Lise Meitner, Qian-Shiung, Wu, Donna Strickland, and countless others in every corner of the globe. Today, over a century after her greatest discoveries, Marie Curie's notebooks remain so radioactive that they must be handled in lead-lined boxes by scientists in protective suits. That's the paradox of her legacy: fragile, dangerous, eternal, just like the atom. When the light becomes a poison. From the start, the world had marveled at the glow of radium. It was mysterious, beautiful, magical. It glowed in the dark, painted watchdials, cured illnesses, but no one fully understood its cost. Not yet. Marie Curie carried vials of radium in her pockets. She kept glowing samples next to her bed. She handled radioactive materials with no gloves, no masks, no protection. Why? Because no one had discovered the true biological danger of radiation. She slowly grew weaker over the years. Her vision faded. Her hands trembled. Her bones ached. In 1934, she died from aplastic anemia, a condition directly caused by prolonged radiation exposure. She had discovered the fire, and it had burned her from the inside out. It wasn't just Marie. In the 1920s, young women were hired in American factories to paint watch dials with glow-in-the-dark radium paint. They were told it was safe. They were told to lip point their brushes, to shape the tips with their tongues. They joked, laughed, glowed in the dark like fairies. Then their teeth fell out. Then their jaws broke. Then the cancers came. Hundreds died. Their lawsuits led to the first major regulations on occupational radiation safety, but only after the damage was done. Unlike fire, radiation doesn't hurt when it touches your skin. It doesn't sting or burn immediately. That's what makes it so deadly. It sneaks into the body, damages DNA, and silently builds chaos. Sometimes over years, sometimes in the next generation. The same force that cured cancer could also cause it. This duality became one of the greatest ethical puzzles of modern science. How do we use a tool so powerful that it can both save and destroy? Because of Marie's suffering, because of the radium girls, because of countless silent victims in labs and factories, the world learned to respect the atom, to protect scientists and workers, to never let curiosity blind caution Marie. Curie never lived to see the consequences, but her pain became a warning for the generations after her. And that warning echoed through every nuclear lab and every hospital around the world. How one woman lit the world and never went out. She was born in a country that denied her education. She studied in secrecy. She crossed borders with dreams in her suitcase, and with nothing but her mind, she changed the world, forever. Marie Curie didn't just discover new elements. She discovered new frontiers. She rewrote what it meant to be a woman, a scientist, a fighter. Every time a girl picks up a physics textbook, every time a cancer patient receives radiation therapy, every time a student looks up and whispers, "Who was Madame Curie?" the flame flickers again, because science is more than formulas. It's courage, it's heartbreak, it's discovery, it's sacrifice. Marie Curie didn't just give us radium, she gave us a new way to see the invisible. Her notebooks are still too radioactive to touch. Her name is carved in the stone of the Pantheon. Her face appears on money, medals, and museums. But her true legacy isn't in marble or metal. It's in the minds she unlocked, the lives she saved, and the generations she empowered. She showed the world that science doesn't belong to kings, to men, to the privileged. It belongs to the curious, to the brave, to the ones who walk into the dark and search for light. And so, Marie Curie's story doesn't end with death. It continues every time we dare to ask why, every time we look deeper, dig further, or dream bigger. The flame she lit was not a candle. It was a supernova, and we're still living in its light.
Keep the light of Curie alive. If Marie Curie's journey lit even a small spark inside you, then don't let it fade. Hit the like button because your support helps this channel shine brighter. Subscribe so you never miss the next powerful story that will grow your mind and your English. And share this video with someone who needs inspiration today, someone who needs to remember that greatness is built moment by moment, just like Marie Curie did. Thank you for learning and for being part of this journey. Your presence here truly means the world.